Hi everyone. Hi Sukanya and Manu. I think while people continue to join in, we do have a quick 5-minute introductory presentation to just give an overview of the forum, of what the Masterclass series is about, and why really the need for this topic emerged, especially through recent discussions. So I think it might be best to get started with that presentation as more people come on in, if that works. Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Shruti.
Okay, perfect. So firstly, welcome to the third series of our master classes that we've begun in the last couple of months through the forum. The India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions is essentially a coalition of research, practice, and finance organizations that are working together to scale up the adoption of nature-based solutions in Indian cities in order to shape climate resilience as well as community resilience within urban environments in India. So our steering committee currently comprises of the following organizations that you can see on screen right now, and we are continuing to grow as we move along with different sort of pieces of work that we're engaged within. The forum itself is currently it functions as three sort of task forces or areas of work where we focus on finance and funding to scale up nature-based solutions within Indian cities. We also look at knowledge and capacity building to really support best practice solutions, to support research areas, as well as to increase stakeholder capacities to really access finance solutions. And we also look at coalition building and partnerships, as well as outreach, where that allows us to really share the knowledge that's produced through the forum. The intention of the masterclass series is to really exchange knowledge with actors in the NbS ecosystem, as well as compile solutions in the form of guidance documents or standard operating procedures that can then go ahead and inform government frameworks and policies down the line. The need for today's discussion on finance for community engagement specifically emerged from various project related explorations that we've been undertaking through our different organizational capacities, as well as through dialogues that have been hosted by the forum. So, an example of this is what you can see on the screen right now, where WRI India has been engaged with its partners over the last 3 years to really implement nature based solutions within low income neighborhoods as well, and these specific projects, which you can see, have been undertaken within Mumbai. Communities within here in the typologies that we're projecting right now are more vulnerable to climate risks such as heat stress as well as flooding due to the density, the location of the settlements, and the services that are provided to the communities to really adapt to climate risks as well. The lack of services. Additionally, there are concerns of waste management. There are concerns of basic amenities such as education, which also adds to various health risks that are subjected upon these communities. So it's a compounded effect of really climate risks and how habitat concerns and degenerated habitats all add to health risks, which are experienced more by communities that are living within these vulnerable sort of neighborhoods. And while we all know that nature-based solutions can mitigate some of these risks, it's really imperative to adopt a more holistic outlook to projects at this stage, which really can then engage and empower communities throughout the implementation processes, while also looking at not just blue-green solutions in itself, but also looking at other contextual concerns such as waste management, as well as social concerns such as safety that are experienced and access to open spaces that are experienced, which really NBS aims to improve. So, quickly to take you through some barriers to finance that were also identified through these projects and through these dialogues. This includes a lack of funding for pre and post implementation stages of projects. While people who've been working as practitioners within this space have known to get more funding for implementation stages, such as capex cost, for example, the pre and the post implementation stages, such as technical studies and O&M, specifically maintenance processes, don't get as much funding. Secondly, there are also limited stakeholder capacities to access finance models which are being developed across the country through climate action plans, through various other sort of innovative finance models which are being prepared. So, however, just to point out that it's not just about the preparation of those finance structures, but also really building non-financial mechanisms as well. So, specifically capacity building of actors which are working within the NbS space and communities so that they can access opportunities that the finance models allow. An example of this would perhaps be insurance models, parametric insurance models, which are being explored within the country through various programs right now. How can they best be accessed by communities in the case of a climate hazard event? And the third thing is also that there is a lack of MEL frameworks which have been piloted to really suit the Indian context, which can generate evidence of social and economic impacts which are produced as a result of doing these nature-based solutions within communities. So how do we even start building evidence which can then provide assurance to investors to start funding some of these processes which can enhance social impacts and also enhance environmental impacts of nature-based solutions down the line? So, given the identification of some of these barriers, the session today really aims to unpack how community engagement processes can lead to effective nature based solutions and bring forth barriers and models to incentivize engagements. We will look at this through different topics, through different agendas throughout the session, where we look at different community driven nature based solution models which have led to sustainable ecosystems and sustainable livelihoods as well. How do you shift investor focus to really start recognizing a more holistic and a cohesive approach to nature based solutions? The second is what kind of finance structures can be put together? Can we look at convergence of different finance structures to really incentivize communities? How do you also evaluate NbS benefits and distribute these benefits so that you're also not being exploitative throughout or during the community engagement process? And the third is to really look at what kind of partnerships and collaborations can be built for more long-term success of the projects. How do you navigate risks? How do you build synergies to really co-finance projects and also integrate communities within your larger finance structures to make this whole process more inclusive? And with that introduction, we have two speakers and we can begin the presentations now. So we have Manu Gupta, who's the co-founder of Seeds. Seeds is a recognized not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to enhancing community resilience through innovative solutions for disaster readiness, response, and rehabilitation. His experience encompasses national and regional advocacy. It looks at mobilizing community-led efforts for recovery and risk reduction, and also addresses climate change adaptation through humanitarian partnerships. And then the second presentation will be by Sukanya Narain, who is an interdisciplinary impact practitioner. She has over a decade of experience working at the intersection of sustainable development, impact finance, as well as gender. She is the founder of Sustainnovate and also serves as a strategy advisor and mentor at the Self-Employed Women's Association, that's SEWA. So we'll begin with Manu, and we just in terms of the format of the masterclass, we have two presentations of 20 minutes each, followed by 30 minutes, which we've kept aside for Q&A. My colleague Aarti will be moderating the Q&A session. Do feel free to park all questions within the Q&A tab during the masterclass, and we'll be compiling them and addressing them as soon as the presentations are done with. So over to you, Man. I'll start by sharing your presentation.
Thank you, Shruti, and welcome everyone. So today I will just run you through some of the learnings that have happened in the course of some of the projects that we have been implementing. And how do we bring in community engagement in nature-based solutions work that we have done both in urban and rural areas. I know the excuse me, the focus is on urban areas, particularly as Shruti had mentioned earlier, but there are models that I thought would be relevant for us to pick up from other contexts as well. The other thing that I want to call out right at the beginning is that this is still work in progress. Nothing is set in stone. The contextual realities are so varying across our country, and therefore a model that will work in one location, one context may not be in the same set applicable to another location. So what I would like to focus today is more on the principles that are more or less universal and can then be used in a variety of contexts and challenges. And the third, a very important part of this presentation today is the fact that we should not look at participation and community engagement as a one-off. It has to be a part of the project design. So the presentations and the case studies that I want to share with you are ones where the engagement was part of the entire project design right from the outset. So with that, just we can move quickly to some of the slides here. So next one, please. Well, we've already spoken about this. Shruti has already very generously introduced the organization. We've been working for last 30 years and have looked at variety of challenges. Our approach to nature-based solution is to build community resilience, as a means to build community resilience. And that's how we approach these solutions. And our objective of involving communities is that their inherent link to the natural environment is in a way reinforced through these NbS works that we carry out, and in turn contributes to building their own resilience against climate shocks and stresses. Um, and obviously, we have seen a whole variety of shocks and the way climate has impacted communities. Next, please. So this is the urban program that we have been carrying out, the Surge Initiative, as we call it. Um, and this primarily focuses on the rejuvenation of water bodies and wetlands in urban areas, and looking at a very important aspect that these water bodies and wetlands in urban areas were traditionally always part of the setup. In fact, there were reasons why human settlements came around these water bodies. But over a period of time, we have seen how these water bodies have been degraded, encroached upon, and left on the side. So the approach that the Surge Initiative takes is to restore that inherent link, that these are part of the community commons and they are somewhere inherently linked to the community's well-being. Next, please. Yeah, so there are three things we are looking at. As I said, primarily water body rejuvenation in very densely populated urban areas, not necessarily just looking at low income pockets, but also middle and higher income settlements, because they do have a role and a stake in these kind of water bodies, which have unfortunately become backyards for most of these colonies and neighborhoods. But also looking at land loss mitigation strategy in towns and urban areas which are located especially on higher elevations in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, which are suffering from frequent landslide phenomena. Not to also forget that even parts of Western Ghats, towns in Maharashtra have been affected by landslides, and therefore, how do we look at NbS or solutions to address the land loss that is taking place? Some of the coastal cities are suffering from beach erosion, as you very well know. And due to that, again, there has been challenges of saline water ingress and other land loss phenomena, leading to a lot of displacement of local communities. Not to, of course, forget that the loss of livelihood that happens. Next, please. So I just want to go through some of these case study to sort of dig a little deeper into the kind of community engagements that happened. So next slide, please. I'm sorry for my cough, but so I'll excuse myself on that. Hauze Shamsi is actually a 12th century monument in the heart of Delhi in Mehrauli near the Qutub Minar. It's an area that has been part of the ancient water supply system. So this was the reservoir, and those of you who are from Delhi would know that this would then flow into the Satpura Dam and then eventually to Tughlaqabad. The entire South Delhi was actually at one point of time supplied water from this reservoir, which is almost 1,000 years old. Of course, the picture on the bottom left can very well displays the fact that much of the area around this water body has been degraded. And in fact, what you see is only a portion of what is left with water. A lot of areas have been, used by the settlements that have come in, mostly unauthorized settlements. Now, to start engaging communities in something that is part of their historical identity was an uphill task. We thought it was an obvious one, but it started by looking at what could communities relate to in their immediate environments, which they would want to see the change in. And that led us to, excuse me, the formation of Pride of Shamsi, which was a group of young citizens. And the very first exercise we did with them was trying to understand the risks that are involved in and around Hauze Shamsi, the reservoir, and also then run by them the historical significance of these things. So before even thinking of what the solution is, we actually started working out with the local communities, the neighborhood association, and then forming this Pride of Shamsi, which was kind of a local federation of market trader associations, of youth groups, of neighborhood association, the residents association, etc. And they, in turn, once they started taking ownership, then we brought in these technical solutions along with the Archaeological Survey of India to start looking at what are the possible ways in which installations can be done, but also then how do we create awareness around these installations? How do we educate communities about the importance of these installations so that they in turn take ownership? And so that was the approach. I'll come into what were the learnings in one set later in the presentation. Next one, please. Again, Gurugram, Gurgaon, as many of you know, is a bustling metropolitan. It has a population of about 1.8 million now, maybe more. And there, this was a upper middle class kind of neighborhood. And obviously, when we come across these, the middle and higher income kind of thing, there is a level of indifference that we find among citizens. And therefore, it was an uphill task to create some kind of traction, some kind of ownership with local communities. Second, there were encroachments around, and I think that's a typical problem around these kind of natural systems that exist within our cities. They are categorized as barren lands or land for future use, and therefore they are often encroached upon. And so here, it was an example of more about show and tell, and how do you attract people to start taking ownership as a result of what they are seeing as change in their environment. So here we had flipped the coin a little bit, looked at what are ways we could quickly revive, and this was done in a very short span of just about 3 months. The entire lake, which was actually all full of waste, was revived, and water table restored, and then, with some additional ways of augmenting water in these ponds. So once that change started happening, the ownership started building as they saw the use of this area for recreational purposes, but also for an area where they could sort of see lower temperatures. And this summer season was one of the hottest in much of our country. We could see that lower temperatures were recorded in these areas. Um, and that built a lot of, again, ownership among people. So at one point, there was a very strong opposition in the beginning, including police cases when we started doing our work. All that turned into support and a lot of additional investments by communities by way of hiring service staff, paying for their salaries, and even taking turns to guard the place so that there are no further encroachments in this place. The uh, the process here of engaging with communities involved creating a public forum, public dialogue spaces where opposing views, where different views could find a place. And then through facilitated discussions, we could arrive at not just one, but a list of objectives to which people could agree upon. And that started sort of building like a snowball effect where, excuse me, more communities, more members of the community started coalescing with these agreed common objectives. Next, please. Yes. A similar example in Wazirabad. In interest of time, I will not go into the details of this, but again, a very degraded area, backyard for many of these colonies became a very active use area. And it has not only obviously improved the micro temperatures there, but also become an area for local biodiversity to thrive. And we are seeing bird watchers coming during birding seasons, etc. Uh, this also has served as a natural sink for much of the flooding events that have been taking place in the city of Gurugram. So, by dredging the whole area and by increasing the pond area, we could achieve multiple co-benefits from this project. Now, again, here, from apathy to ownership, the journey was similar. And again, we what we saw was the role of leadership playing a very important role, because again, the usual case of multiple agencies having jurisdiction, multiple stakeholders laying their stake. And that's where investment in good local leadership really had monumental benefits for us in terms of getting people organized and getting institutions aligned to a common objective. So these institutions, including the municipal corporation, the Gurgaon Metropolitan Development Authority, the irrigation department, and so on. So that leadership role was an important one here. Next one. And yes, what was it before and after? It has become a very green microgreen area, and attracting a lot of recreational activities. Next, please. So again, just now trying to sort of put these things in perspective. What we were looking at is these three parts: the mutual assistance part, the self-help, and the public assistance. And activities that were based on these three pillars, if you like. And this has been a model that we have really invested in almost all our projects that we do in urban areas. uh, it starts with self-help. What can I do? What is it for me? And how can I be involved? And this would mean different groups, women groups, the youth, the daily wagers. Each one of them have a role, and we found them involved in engagements that were aligned to their preferences. So for example, the youth would love to carry a smartphone and take pictures and make assessments of where the problems are, where the encroachments are, and they would love to put that in a collage and share it with the authorities, hold them to account. Whereas women were more about protection and how can their children go to school safely in these kind of setups. So how do we work with uh, individuals and then identify from there that what is it that you could achieve together which you cannot achieve as individuals. And therefore we created these kind of citizen forums, the kind of dialogue space I mentioned earlier, which allowed people to share views, allowed local leaders to emerge, and then they took the metal in their hands to then start working on those common interest. And then we created these convergence moments with the public authorities, where that dialogue happened with the police department, with the development department, with the district collector's office, to start saying that, okay, let's do some pilots, let's take some areas and do it together. And that's what created a lot of interest, both from citizens as well as from the authorities, to start looking good to their own citizenry. And with all that, being recognized, being covered in media, obviously amplified the participation as well. So this is just to bring to perspective how things emerged. Next one, please. I'm not going to spend too much time in the next few slides. I know I have just 2 minutes left, but just to give you an idea of how in rural areas, when we are doing mangroves, the involvement of self-help groups, and linking them to nature-based solutions. So next slide talks about how self-help groups have actually built these nurseries. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, and how they have been involved in not just restoring these mangroves, but also providing, an income to them, and also being able to draw out some of the benefits that mangroves can provide, besides the income that they generated from the local nurseries. Next one. This one talks about coastal bioshields, and similarly, again, the involvement of local community groups in identifying livelihood opportunities, while at the same time they are building these natural bioshields, which is in the next slide, please. Where we could see that their ownership was built because there is a very strong direct and indirect income component, and interest that was there in sustaining these bioshields. So this is a longitudinal picture over a 10 to 12 year period, shows the kind of change that has been brought in the coastal areas. This is just outside the city of Chennai. Just to now wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Next slide, please. Just some statements here. Show me the solution. Solutions to communities' problems should correspond to their perception of risk and solutions. It's not something that we can impose from outside. Unless there is a strong perception of the risk, of the problems, of the solution, there cannot be a standalone solution for this. Next one. The emerging principle here is that if we really have to build the resilience of communities exposed to hazards, in our case, uh, that inherent link of the environment as a protector has to be reinforced. Over a period of time, with all the industrial material coming in, external influences coming in, this natural link has become very, very tenuous. And that's where I think that reinforcement, as a very basic principle in our project design, certainly helps in building that community's ownership and role. What is our role? Next slide, please. Is that our role is to create those enabling environments that strengthen community understanding and application of their natural environment, and then bring in the solutions, bring in technical solutions that help remove impedance and not necessarily replace what is already very well established traditionally in those communities. I'll skip the next slide and just come to the last one. This is something maybe we can discuss later. But what has worked, and this is very much my last few messages, restoring that sense of identity. You remember I talked about that historical place, that historical reservoir, and how that people, when they started identifying with themselves with such a strong cultural presence, did the ownership start building on. Creating those enabling places for dialogue to happen, for free flow of dialogue in parallel to the activities that we are doing on the ground. Role clarity, as I said, self-help, mutual help, and external help need to be clearly identified so that it creates a roadmap for communities. Transparency on resources. I know the Sukanya is going to speak to you more about resources, but we have seen that we put 20%, but the 80% comes from communities in kind. And that's the magic that one can create through this kind of engagement, which is far more monumental in terms of the spin-offs that you can achieve. And then a demonstrated commitment. It's not just talk, but pilot projects, initial change that can then be leveraged by communities to create bigger effects. And it's all about restoring ownership of community commons. Um, we've used this in disaster situations. My last one is an image from Wayanad in Kerala, where we built this house completely out of local material that was destroyed in the landslide of 2018. And this is a house that personifies nature-based solutions at their very, very best. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I rushed a little bit, but I've also exceeded, and I'm conscious of those 4 minutes extra that I've taken. So do excuse me for that. Thank you very much. Over to you, Shruti.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Manu. I think that was a great overview to how Seeds has been integrating community engagement processes and building community alliances and institutions specifically to really carry on some of the NbS processes and projects which you showed us. So please, just a reminder, please do drop in all of the questions that you all have within the Q&A chat, and we'll take up questions together after Sukanya's presentation wraps up. So over to you, Sukanya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Shruti. And thank you, Dr. Manu. I think it was a great presentation also for me also to understand at depth what Seeds does. And I think just the note at which you left in terms of really building on the understanding and the relationship that the communities already have with the natural environment. I think that is the perfect place for me to begin because I would be resting a lot on my experience with SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association. And even though while that I would be talking about are mostly based in across rural communities. This is just to show how much they can be adapted to the urban constraint context as well. And I think just to let me just first share my screen and then I can continue. Wait a second. Is it visible?
It's loading. Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. So, what we would be discussing today essentially is kind of carrying on from where Dr. Manu left with respect to really understanding the nature of community engagement and really what does it take to instill that community agency that is required to sustain the outcomes one even when the project is over. So we would be looking at some key insights from the successful community-led nature-based solution initiatives that I have been a part of, and I have also learned across the journey of SEWA since the last 50 years, so to say. And while it's very difficult to cover all of them during this session, I have chosen a few initiatives which perhaps would be more relatable also with the urban context. The second thing that, of course, you'll be looking at is the financing, because I think financing is really one of the major challenges when we really talk about sustainable outcomes. So it would help to also understand them in the context of the examples, but also following that in terms of the continuum of capital that is really available for nature-based solutions. Now, starting with what nature-based solutions from a community lens looks like. And here I would really like to emphasize that everything that I'll talk about would be from a grassroots ground up community lens, because the agency flows from there, as we have seen in our work. So really the environment and community livelihoods and ecosystems being intrinsically linked has always been our starting point. We have found it difficult to go directly and talk about climate risks and the impact of climate change without making it relatable to their personal challenges and the rural context that exists. And it would be the same with urban context as well. So, for instance, if I could just come to the first example, and all of these points would be clearer when we talk through examples. So, one of the most notable SEWA's initiative has been the One Lakshmi Mahila Utpadan Sahakari Mandal. Now, this is a tree growers cooperative which is based in Ganeshpura, which is the Mehsana district of Gujarat. Now, it's not entirely rural; it's a peri-urban area. And the initiative really is rooted in the need of the community that was identified. Now, for those who are unversed with SEWA, SEWA is one of the largest trade unions of India where we work with informal women workers. So we already mobilize community members across villages, and then we work on their needs and what the needs that they identify for their livelihood generation and their self-reliance. So here also, when it really came to identifying a nature-based solution which would be relevant to the community and which would really be owned by them to see it through to the completion, we depended upon the communities. So in this scenario, what really happened was that in 1986, when we started our work there, the 41 farmers there who did not have a land of their own, they were struggling to earn livelihoods, and they had come to SEWA and they had talked to SEWA representatives about wanting to do something but not knowing what to do, because the lands there were either barren, or they were obviously not owned, or the water system was depleting. There was a lot of fluoride content, so they didn't know really what to work with what they had. And so SEWA kind of asked them to kind of identify which would be the lands that probably they can identify in their surrounding, where these 41 farmers could probably see themselves working. And then there could be an advocacy with the government in terms of the local authorities, in terms of getting that land to work for the farmers. Now, this happened. This took a lot of time, but what really happened was that these women managed to get a lease of 10 acres of land in this area for 30 years. It was, I think, the year 1986, and it continues even today. And what they got was a barren land, a land which had absolutely no landscaping. It had no water. It had to the leveling had to be done. So basically, everything the community members had to do. And here, like, just to highlight what really motivated again them was because for them as small and marginal farmers, there was absolutely no other source of livelihood, and this was the only thing that they saw which could kind of give them livelihood and also really become a sustainable outcome in terms of the land that they were building for future livelihood generation as well. So that's why the link is something that would really want to emphasize here. And what really worked in terms of mobilization of the women was like right from the beginning, mobilizing them around the concept of shared ownership and a cooperative leadership. So these landless women farmers, they all of them kind of signed on this lease and they became the owners. There was an integrated development approach. There was just not the focus on the environmental aspect, but really about how does it really contribute to their economic the stability and also the social equity, because these women were across villages. So what really happened in terms of financing as well was that the women themselves were ready to put some stake in at the beginning, because when it came to seeds and when it came to really putting this land together, so they came together. And also in terms of support, they had public institutions, which again, just to emphasize, because they were a part of this trade union and a collective already as SEWA, they could approach public institutions as a collective and get help from companies like Indian Petroleum Corporation Limited, which kind of funds for plastic pools. So when they realized that they had to like walk a lot for getting water to irrigate on this land, the company started giving them funds to explore alternate options. So plastic pools was something that they built on their own. But then again, they realized that something that is dependent upon rains would probably not survive. So there, they kind of took SEWA's help again in terms of building a borewell, which could help them irrigate the land. The other thing that they did was, again, partnerships with private sector, help them get shared access to equipments to irrigate this land. So this way, they could kind of divide the work among them so that the burden wasn't on one. So again, it became really a shared community ownership experience. And what they really did was, because the 10-acre land in terms of even in terms of sustaining outcomes, and which till date continues, is what they did was they implemented the lottery system, whereby on chits they had kind of written a name and allocated some portions of land, and whoever gets that land allocated was responsible for that particular land till harvesting. And any produce that came out of it was divided into 2:1 ratio. Two parts went to the cooperative itself to increase its activities, and the one part went to the women. Now, all of this ecosystem took a considerable time to build. But at the end of the day, because right from the beginning, it was led by the communities themselves, it went on to become a really sustainable model for eco-generation. Now it has transited into an eco-tourism destination for most of the urban areas in Gujarat, because they have taken to now organic farming, and now really it's a nature resort, so to say. They have also gotten a seed license, whereby they are distributing seeds to villages around their cooperative. So that's also become their source of revenue. So that kind of the incentives to continue doing what they do in terms of nature-based solutions continues to build on from there. And at the end of the day, it's the integrated development approach that has really helped them make a case for it. So this is one of the primary examples of SEWA that we usually share when it comes to really the initiative that did not just start with a community-led initiative, but continues till date to be a women-led collective social enterprise, and continues to build on nature-based solutions as and when the situation is required. And now they are also sharing their best practices. The second example that I would like to give is about clean energy, and again, how is it intrinsically linked to economic environment? Because I think one of the things that we have realized when it comes to building agency is, how do you relate it to the assets that they already own? So when we started initiating the access to LPG for people in our villages and people really staying in the last mile communities, we realized that it wasn't always possible, because villages were too distant and it wasn't possible for them to get that access without incurring a sufficient cost. So what really we worked with partners again, say the part about them already being organized in a way where they could discuss the challenges they were facing among themselves as a collective, led to representatives of SEWA kind of suggesting that what can we do with what they already have. So there we had service providers come up with biogas digesters, and the household's needs were assessed. There were awareness and literacy campaigns that were built around that, because there were already repercussions and health costs that they were incurring because of using wood-fried stoves. And it wasn't that difficult to convince them to make the shift when they could see the cost benefit of it, because the adverse effects were something that they were already living in terms of unclean cooking solutions. So when this happened, again, one thing to emphasize here is that it always begins with the pilot. So when we even in rural communities, the way I think Dr. Manu was talking about urban communities, the conversion is not on the go when a new solution is suggested or a new way of doing things is suggested. It takes time for people to believe, and especially there, the trust deficit is even more. So in terms of they have to see demonstrable results. And that's exactly what happened in this scenario also. First, we had like 2 villages take up, 20 biogas digesters installed. And then subsequently, it went on to become 500 and 7 districts in Gujarat. And then again, like being funded at a global climate impact fund level, because then it went on to go to other states as well. So again, here, there was kind of a ownership of the initiative, because they knew that they were using their own assets of cattle dung, because everybody had cows in their homes. And so there was kind of a ownership with that. Also with respect to financing, especially because the availability of initiative and alliances for carbon credits, we partnered with gold standards to kind of reduce the cost. It was USD, I think it was around USD 500 to 700, a cost of biogas digester. Due to this partnership, they got it at USD 110. And again, this part also could have been unaffordable for them. But because they were also organized into alternate livelihoods, and that is again why I keep stressing that the fact that you are already organized into collectors for livelihood help them kind of bear the cost as well. So being a part of that entity, so to say, in terms of an informal working group, we have talked about self-help groups, we talk about federations as well at district levels. It kind of helps them ensure inflow of credit for such solutions and other nature-based solutions that might follow in the regular way scheme of things, because for them it's operating within their local economy and it's not something which is very new or that would probably elicit some kind of distrust. The last example probably I would give of SEWA is the solar pumps adoption that has happened, because I think this was again a very significant mobilization that happened once we took up this Building this Cleaner Skies campaign. That is our climate change campaign at SEWA. So when we took that, the main thing was to really mobilize the communities around the impact of diesel and electric pumps. Again, once you start talking to communities in the language of the problems that they are already confronted with, because this is something that when you have a conversation, they are very vocal about the health implications that have been facing, the elderly in their families have been facing. We have personally engaged with soil pan farmers, and the amount of the amount of exhaustion and the amount of health brunt that the elderly had taken, because as people might be aware that they spend their time in deserts for extended months. So just the idea of having control of your means of production and means of irrigation was very empowering for them. And that kind of showed in the solutions later and as well. And their willingness to enter into financing arrangements where you are availing government subsidies, but you are also taking returnable grants, and you're also taking CSR funding as loans, which probably you can return within the internal scope of things, was something because they could connect it to. A personal story would be where a daughter talked about how I wished my grandmother had access to something like this, because she wouldn't have had to spend so much time in the desert waiting for the sun. Waiting for the irrigation pump from the intermediaries, and being charged so much. So these are things that kind of went a long way into instilling that ownership. And again, if you see across these examples, it was the partnerships across. The starting point was always the credit that they managed internally as groups. But eventually, when you start going to scaling up and reaching to more people, and when, for example, 15,000 people, 15,000 women and farmers converted from diesel to solar, I think with the help of Bank of Baroda. So I think that itself, when you reach that stage, you obviously move beyond your own internal lending of self-help groups, because you have to target market capital. And for that, again, you need to be a part of some credible collective identity, which kind of helps you access that. So from here itself, I'll just continue to talk about financing sustainable NbS outcomes. And now, I think we've talked a lot about sustainable finance, which usually obviously means the finance which is directed towards social and environmental outcomes. But from a community lens, we really talk about finance that can actually create those sustainable outcomes even when the project is over. Because that for us would be sustainable finance, because objective might be something, but unless it's having the lasting impact, and unless the finance is really embedded across these different stages of project design, which ensure long-term sustainability, it becomes very difficult to really talk about sustainable finance as a concept from a grassroots lens as well, and also from long-lasting impact perspective. So here, like for example, that's why we're talking about the continuum, because when we talk about nature-based solutions, we talk about from conceptualization to engagement to execution, maintenance, and scale-up. There are a lot of different kinds of fundings which are available. Again, I wouldn't say that this is particularly as rigid in terms of the stage one after the other. It depends upon the initiatives. It depends upon the context. It depends upon the maturity of the location where you're acting on. But one thing is very clear, that when you start with an idea, it's important to depend upon catalytic funding, because you need that high risk tolerance capital, whereby you can do the pre-engagement and you can pilot initiatives. And every initiative, financing, for example, even at an institution like SEWA, which is from a scale perspective considerably big. We have been here for more than 50 years. We work with 30 lakh women across 18 states. But still, like for any initiative to really reach a stage, you start with pilots. You start with few villages, you start with few women, and you start with how that is being accepted. So you need that kind of funding. It helps when communities, a lot of effort is already being put in community mobilization, because that really becomes the foundation of getting community buy-in. And that requires either, if you have an organizational funding, or you have communities willing to pool in themselves because they believe in it enough, or of course you definitely have CSR and philanthropy. And a lot of initiatives that we have seen even beyond SEWA recently has been crowdfunding as well, because especially with the youth, I think those are the mediums that they have been targeting. Then, of course, you come to blended finance for risk reduction and maintenance. And this can be before or after actually impact investments for scaling as well, because blended finance kind of continues in terms of when you really talk about maintaining a particular initiative. You need that kind of revolving fund at times to keep the initiative going. I'll talk about more in terms of the example of what blended finance initiative has been. But the third, of course, is the investing for scaling, impact investing, where you, of course, either social enterprises are working for nature-based outcomes, where you have demonstrable, measurable social and environmental outcomes. This definitely comes at a stage where you have proven your pilots and you know that you can replicate those initiatives or scale it to reach more people. In urban settings, sometimes it can get difficult in terms because there's lack of enough land available in terms of what we want to do. So, but then again, then you have other alternatives in terms of what you do at an institutional level. So that could be probably a target for that. And public funding is very, very important in terms of tax incentives and subsidies that you get for nature-based solutions, tax breaks, green bonds, for the longevity of any initiative that you run. Because even, for example, the example that I gave of the Tree Growers Cooperative, the longevity was really kept intact with the government, the local authority support, the municipality support, because this way you kind of ensure that the rehabilitation of the land and everything happens in tandem with what the government is also the same page with, and also the private sector. So all of this kind of continues in terms of what the nature of the project is and the nature of the intervention is. An example for the blended finance initiative would be the SEWA Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund. And I think this goes on to something that we were talking previously also about, that initiatives are just not supposed to be targeted at dealing with climate risk, but by way of how they are designed, they build in the communities that need to address climate adaptation. Because unfortunately, what we have seen, again, like I said, unless it's like contextual, it's very difficult to relate to the high level motherboard statements about climate change. So that's why like the livelihood and recovery and resilience fund again was a pooling fund from different sources. It's a blended finance vehicle, which is basically to provide immediate support in terms of various climate shocks. And initially it was that the kind of credit that is available to the marginalized, especially. Anyways, they are not part of formal financial systems. The kind of credit that they get or have access to is extremely limited. So this way, we wanted to have a stabilization fund whereby that if some implications of climate change happen, they are given that platform to go and rebuild their income. It works as a revolving fund, so they kind of return the fund that they receive. And ultimately, because of this credit history that they build, because of this funding revolving that's happening, they are able to also access formal financial market at a later point. This was the fund under which the Paul farmers also received the diesel pumps, conversion of the diesel pumps that I was talking about, because it is both focused at affordable credit and also giving technical assistance to the members of the communities who really want to opt for nature-based solutions. The other thing is the insurance products, the parametric heat insurance initiative of SEWA, which is being considered to be quite innovative, because initially the insurance products were really focused on actual loss assessments, which made it very, very late, because areas in Gujarat, Assam, and all of these places have been very, very prone to floods. And in the last few years, we have seen it for ourselves. So by the time the loss actually used to happen, it was too late to go back and really build on from things. So that's why now the parametric heat insurance initiative really ensures the triggers on predetermined temperature thresholds. It has actually, from what we have known in the last few years, it has seen multiple payouts during a heat season, which enables the women and the communities concerned to really take care of their health, which it has an adverse effect when it comes to heat waves or any adverse weather event, take care of their children's schools, any other household needs, because the immediate implication of any reduced earning or any income depletion really happens on the household expenses and education being cut down and not having money to meet health needs and families slipping into poverty. So this has been immensely helpful for the communities. Again, it has really been designed by having the community buy-in. So having their voice integrated in that process, which is incredibly important. The last thing that is, of course, which is very important in terms of financing is community ownership of financing models. So like I said before, the self-help groups and the cooperative, they have really, really served as important organizations for, for getting at least the pilots to a stage where they can show demonstrable results, and only then we have like access to scalable capital. At SEWA, of course, we have a SEWA bank as well with shareholders of our women workers who take microloans and who provide credit support to adopt cleaner technology solutions and for other projects that they want to implement in their villages. From an urban perspective, green banks has been a concept which has globally been very accepted now. I think in India, we're still at a stage of developing that. But in terms of really having community funds, whereby it not just gets in community buy-in, but also really has a very dedicated approach towards the nature-based solutions that we want to undertake in a particular location through participative decision making, can go a long way. And this also gets them to a platform of really leveraging carbon credits, because obviously once you work in an institutional capacity, it kind of becomes easy to reduce, to partner with organizations that are kind of giving you that cost page advantage, and this kind of reduces the project cost as well. So the learnings essentially has been what we have.
Sorry, Sukanya, just to stop you for a minute. We are a little over time now, so if you could just wrap up in the next minute or two, because there are a lot of questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I can just wrap up into
Sure. Thank you.
I've not been getting messages anyway. Sorry.
No.
But no, I'm sorry to take more time. But I think just to conclude this, I think it's really about how do you really build a sense of agency and ownership, because I think that is what has really sustained outcomes. And then because when we talk about really leveraging innovative financing mechanisms, you can't do that unless you have community capacities built to really make the maximum out of it, because a lot of unawareness can actually lead to exploitation rather than the intended outcome. So that is really important. And the last, of course, is the integrated development approach, both in the engagement that we take and financing, because scaling with depth is very important. I think we focus a lot on scaling with numbers, but I think scaling with depth is really important as pilot projects, so that we can build replicable models that can be emulated everywhere. So I think I'll end it at here, because I think these are the two aspects that were primarily there, and we can discuss the other aspects in Q&As.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I think it was great to hear a little bit about the examples that you gave of the community-owned models and social enterprises, and also the methodologies of how to really converge funds and resources through different partnerships. I'll immediately hand over to my colleague Arati, who's going to be moderating the Q&A. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much again, both our presenters today. We have a bunch of questions. I know I have a few questions as well of my own. So I'm just going to start reading from the bottom. So one of the questions, Manu, this I think directed at you, was just in terms of the examples that you provided. A lot of them were, smaller sort of water bodies, where I think it's a little easier to kind of identify who the community is that engages and impacts these water bodies as well. But when you come to, say, larger water bodies or larger river stretches where the community changes and there are sort of upstream or downstream impacts that they may not have control over, how would you navigate a situation like that? And are there any solutions to that?
Thanks, Arti. This is a good question and a challenging one. So the way we've looked at is, the moment you build ownership, the model itself becomes very scalable. And one of the projects that we did in a part of Delhi, in East Delhi, was actually scaled to some 75,000 local groups within a large area of population of nearly 1 million. So my take is that, if there is this kind of a large scale project, like you said, a riverside, with both upstream, downstream impacts being different from each other, causes being different, we can still be able to scale some of our people-led solutions, provided we can break them down into smaller blocks that communities adjacent to those areas can relate to. And at some level, you federate and bring about some commonality in terms of objectives and shared learnings. Versus an externally driven project becomes far more intensive in terms of resources, in terms of sustenance. And therefore, I think, his question has actually reinforces the case for having communities at the center when it comes to implementing NbS in urban contexts.
Thank you for that. I see there are a bunch of questions around the finance, and before I get into that, I just wanted to direct a question to both of you, actually. Maybe Sukanya, you could go first. But essentially, both of you talked about very different types of community engagement, right? Sukanya, you emphasize on the fact that they're already associated with SEWA and there's some sort of formal institution makes some of the engagement with institutional partners considerably easier. Manu, you were talking on the other end, more sort of dialogues and forums that, as I understood, may not actually have long-term institutionalization built into them, right? They have sort of different time spans, different purposes, and therefore you use these types of community engagements differently. In what are some of the factors actually that influence a choice between a more sort of formal institutionalized process versus a more sort of immediate purpose driven short-term engagement? Sukanya, would you want to go first?
Okay, so just to clarify, I wouldn't even call SEWA as a formal institutionalized process because I think because we work with informal women workers for all that matters across 18 states, so we could never take guarantee of that union is going to stay and women are going to be there. So the intention is never to really, like this is something, an opportunity that is going to come and we're going to have this organized labor union available. I think collectivization and community mobilization was always the core strength as a union. So we saw the advantage of doing that in terms of having a collective voice and having that strength of collective bargaining. So that is something that we realized very early on across trades. And then when it came to also policy advocacy and really being the voice of the communities on the ground, so that really took a very stronger voice, so to say. So even when it came to funding initiatives, etc., because unfortunately or fortunately, funding is about the scale, right? It's about the numbers. It's about the women that you mobilize and the demonstrable outcomes would come. So definitely that helps. And thankfully, it's not about the degree of formalization. That is in terms of, like, of course, we want informal women workers to be formalized, but thankfully, with respect to at least having that bearing on getting access to an initiative, it's not about the degree of formalization. So the results that, for example, we have seen in an established institutional, I would say, for example, in Gujarat, because it was the origin of SEWA, we don't see that probably in Assam, where we started very recently, right? But the fact that that can happen motivates us to get there. And that we have seen across our conversations with government stakeholders. Because, like, especially when you're working as a trade union, they'll ask you how many members, right? But then how many members of them are actually mobilized? So you have to actually show in terms of, if I'm saying this is the climate risk initiative that I'm a part of, these are the people who actually need it, and this is the work that I have done. So that level of formalization is necessary, but not really like institutional is not, I don't think so it's required. But again, it varies from project to project. I would like to emphasize
that. Sure. Manu?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, formal institutions, some kind of established order is always good, gives us a good head start. And yes, in certain situations that applies. But I think in context where there are far too many heterogeneous groups within a given area, I think an investment in local leadership matters a lot. And these local leaders, when sufficiently empowered and enabled through a whole series of actions, can become that glue that bring communities together and then sustain the work that uh, was initiated during that limited project timeline far beyond and even amplify the effect. So, yeah, we need to have that kind of mix and match kind of approaches depending on what is the given at that point of time. Aarti? Mm.
Fair enough. I think the reason I asked that question is also because, especially in the urban context, continuity within communities is always a question, right? You're talking about very localized solutions. So without a formal institution, if people are, say, moving, migrating within the city to other parts of the city or even outside of the city, then how do you kind of build some of this longevity? Because even if the community doesn't necessarily require it, investors may often have more sort of trust in something more institutionalized. So just keen to
Absolutely.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a question here on understanding how digital and mobile tools can be integrated into such climate financing options. But I think that would also hold just in terms of community engagement as well. You mentioned, you know, teenagers taking photographs, for example, of encroachment and things. But in terms of using digital tools to scale some of the examples that you mentioned, any comments on that?
Should Sukanya would like to take that, or I can build on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just start with that. I think digital financial literacy for us really has been the cornerstone of every intervention, not just climate change, but every intervention over the last 3 years, because we had like specific programs targeted at microcredit loans through online digital platforms. We introduced them over the last 3 years. So when we talk about microcredit and affordable credit to adopt climate technologies, so to say, that is something that we definitely have been pushing for, that women are able to take loan for that online. And but before doing that, of course, when COVID happened, there was like a dedicated push for 3 years. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just coming from the rural marginalized communities because, of course, here digital people are digitally illiterate before. So for 3 years, there was really a targeted focus on really training them across, all categories of whether it's financial transactions, whether it's online platforms, because these are micro entrepreneurs. When it comes to really awareness, also using WhatsApp groups to really, because we have a Building Cleaner Skies campaign and green villages transition happening. So how do you really, the thing that I said, everything rests on awareness, and how do you really make it relatable to communities? So we have been mobilizing all these channels, but financial literacy has been key in terms of making it as the way of their life. And they have started taking loans now. So microcredit, but specific with respect to climate change solutions, that would still be a long way to go, because I feel like that still requires them to blend different finances. The amount is not as affordable. So that's why that could be still a next step, so to say.
Yeah, I just want to add one conceptual line to what Sukanya has also said. I mean, I think in the current given context, if you have to reach scale and have people involved, I think technology is that big enabler, and we've seen that model apply in whether it is about the United Payments interface or many other such examples that are there. So conceptually, digital tools have helped in restoring that agency, and by very natural extension of that, the interconnectedness with their natural environment. So whether it is about doing that neighborhood watch kind of thing over mobile phones, or reporting, or even receiving updates, early warnings, this has been a great enabler. So I think we need to really invest in this in future.
Noted. We had a annual summit for the forum recently, and Sri Rahul Kapoor, who's the joint secretary for the Ministry of Housing, mentioned that the Smart Cities mission has a large pool of funding meant specifically for monitoring and using some of these digital technologies. Always available to tap into that as a potential, I think, source for some of this. And so the final sort of chunk of questions, I think, specifically around the carbon credit. So one is, around what kind of funding was available in carbon credits, just kind of understanding what is the volume and frequency, and also how do you kind of deal with time lags in terms of cash flows when it comes to instruments like carbon credits. And then how exactly does it work, especially with a community versus distributing and dispersing it to a community?
Okay, so I was going through the questions, and I think a lot of them were regarding costs and intricate details, which I cannot, I do not have, and I cannot disclose. But at the end of the day, I think with respect to here, I think the thing that you talked about, RP, like the benefit of being institutionalized, really comes into play because as a small and marginal farmer or a micro entrepreneur or a rural woman in a village, it's very difficult for me to get carbon credit for whatever little I'm doing. But the fact that now I'm a part of SEWA and I'm an institution, I probably have collected around 500 women across 7 districts in Gujarat, and now I can talk about like these many biodigesters are being installed here, and this is the amount of 2,000 tons of CO2 are being conserved by my taking up this initiative. So that can happen at an institutionalized approach. And that is exactly what happened with the pilot, because the pilot really was with respect to the installation of 500. It actually started with 20, just 20. And that's the basis on which we then when they started working, that's what we used as a measure of outreach to gold standards when we initiated that partnership again at the SEWA level. So I cannot talk about the terms of that partnership and what really were the details of those. But what really happened was that that's why, because I'm speaking from the community lens, what really happened was that the economic implication on them really fell from 500 to 700 USD to 110. That was what happened because the carbon credits that were being traded at the group level had that cost implication. And the USD 110, like I also said, it's not that it was also affordable for many women, but that kind of got compensated by either the livelihoods that they were already earning because they, like I said, they were organized, or because we also have SEWA Bank and there are possible of microcredit at the federation level for them to take loans and really repay this as they go by. And the fact that the slurry that was being produced from this biodigester was also used in their cultural work. So their fertilization cost also reduced to a great extent. So they were seeing like benefits across in terms of the reduction in economic cost. But again, everything could happen. So I would stress that because it was happening at the SEWA institutionalized level, because if you start talking about units, it becomes very difficult to make a case for carbon credit. So yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. Yeah. I'm aware we're at time. A question has just come in right at the end on individuals and youth coalitions collaborating with government and implementation partners. And if you have any recommendations on that, and I think that with that, we'll probably close the questions. Manu, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous potential of youth groups getting involved. It's just that the nature of engagement and with the right department in the local government has to be worked out carefully. And of course, needless to say, it requires some patient capital to be able to allow it to mature, have its own sort of drawbacks and pitfalls along the way. But there is a lot of role. It starts with local, very, very micro neighborhood level interventions and can then coalesce into larger networks. But I am of the view that governments and local governments in particular, or it's the civil defense departments, for example, are very keen to create these kind of or recognize community youth groups to be involved in civic action. Yes.
All right. Sukanya, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think just to build on that at SEWA, I think we have recognized it like in the last 3-4 years that there's this need to reposition with the young generation members because they see the world differently. They are more aware, they are more connected. There is definitely a need for them to be the voice of the challenges that we face, both I think in rural and urban. And I think that has been a conscious effort towards at the institution level also, that whenever it's like a platform for advocacy, etc., it's the younger leaders who go. The younger leaders who put across the point, because again we come back to the point that it goes a long way in instilling that ownership and agency. it's your village, it's your problem, it's your community, and that's what you're talking about. And there is so much pride and so much vigor in the way they really put their points across. So that's really amazing to see. And I think, yeah, this is definitely the thrust on younger generation and a network. I mean, I've been kind of vouching for that. It would be great to have like even a rural network of, younger leaders, because that's where a lot of work has to happen. Yeah.
All right. On that optimistic note, thank you again to both of our speakers, Sukanya, Manu. This is a very interesting conversation to have. I still have a lot of questions. I'll probably reach out separately on those. And thank you to all of our participants today. Our next masterclass will be scheduled for the first week of next month. We're looking at climate budgeting as a topic. We will be sending out details over the next couple of weeks. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hi, thank you.